Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel organized by the Sony Computer Science Laboratories. Today we'll be speaking about sustainability, which is a vast topic, and in particular we'll be talking about sustainable agriculture. And I'm very happy today, we've got three fantastic speakers with us today. First we have Linda Bedouet, who ran an organic farm in France and also wrote a couple of books on farming, including how to start your own farm. We also have with us from Japan, Masatoshi Funabashi. Good morning, Masa. So Masa is also working at the Sony Computer Science Laboratory in Tokyo. He's also the founder of Synecology, who is promoting and counseling on Synecology. And you'll have the opportunity to learn more about Synecology during this panel, so stay tuned. And last but not least, we have Chris Giotitsas with us. Good morning, Chris. Chris is working at Tallinn University for Technology, and he's been studying the notion of the commons, and particularly the commons for technology in agriculture. And he'll be also able to talk more about that today. Now, just to give a little context about where we are here today. So we are at the Maker Faire in Rome, and it's been a very exciting 3 days. We've seen lots of people. The sustainability team has a stand here where we've been showing some of the robots that we've been building as part of the European project called Robotics for Microfarms. And we've been able to discuss with a lot of people, in particular, a lot of young people and young engineers. And one of the messages that I would like to pass today and to these young people is that, our topic is sustainability and not technology. And I think this is a very important thing to remember. Sustainability will be one of the defining features of society in the years to come. And to think about sustainability, agriculture is actually a very interesting field because it covers so many different aspects. And just to mention a couple of them, in terms of organic agriculture, and I'm thinking now particularly in vegetable production, there are issues such as biodiversity, soil health. There's also the question of logistics. How do you ship the produce to cities? But also, and this is also part of sustainability, there are questions such as labor conditions and fair wages. And these discussions, more societal issues, are also part of this topic. The second point that I would like to raise is that, agriculture is difficult. I mean, for most people, we just go to the supermarket and buy the vegetables without really thinking where they come from. But for farmers on a daily basis, it's a difficult task. And we talk a lot about bringing people to Mars these days, but actually producing food sustainability on this planet for everyone is also a major challenge. And I hope that we can inspire some of the young people today to also dig into this topic. I'm going to do a little quiz, and I'm going to ask Elisabetta to show the first picture. This is a picture that was taken near Paris. It'll pop up very soon now. As you may know, around 1900, Paris was already a big city with 1 million inhabitants. And around Paris, there were a lot of small farms. And most of these farms actually produced enough vegetables for all of the people in Paris. Now, some of these techniques that these farmers were using are picked up again. But there's also some other interesting things, like the picture that I'm showing here on the screen. I hope that the speakers can see it. And I would like to ask them, does any of them know what this is? So this device may be in a more recent version, but it was used more than 100 years ago.
Yeah, c'est quoi alors?
Je pense que c'est un désherbeur.
Bah, dis-le en anglais, hein, vas-y. Vas-y.
Any idea? I don't hear you very well, so speak up loud.
It's not a
Is it a water
metanizer.
plant? Oh, I'm sorry. Go on, please.
It is not a...
Metanizer?
No, is it a steam weedler?
Yes, very good. 1 point for you. It's a quiz. You know, by the end of this panel, we'll have a ranking. So indeed, it is. So indeed, on these small farms that were less than 1 hectare, they had rails on the land to move these machines. And indeed, the green tank you see is to produce vapor. And the metal plates were actually used to push the vapor on the soil to sterilize the soil and prevent the weeds. So it's a pretty sophisticated machine. So just I would like to bring this up because indeed technology and farming, they go a really long way. So I'm going to ask a first question to Linda, just to all the speakers, you don't hesitate to react whenever to the interventions of the other speakers. And for those listening, so Linda might reply in French, and then her friend will translate for her. So first question, Linda. So 8 years ago, you started a farm in France. And
10 years ago.
10 years ago, sorry about that. And can you say a little bit more about the type of farm that you have created? And maybe, Elizabeth, if you can show the second image.
C'était micro-ferme en agroécologie, sur petite surface, avec beaucoup de diversité.
Okay, it's a very diverse micro farm on
Agroécologie.
agroecology. That's growing plants with trees on the farm. It's confined in a very small space, but very diverse.
Okay, so would you say that? I mean, is there? Would you say it's a traditional farm, or would you say it's like a new attempt to create a new type of farming?
It's a mix. C'est les anciennes techniques, mais avec un esprit quand même néo-paysan.
Okay, we're using the old techniques for this farming, but then again, we are using the new spirit of mind to make things work in a modern way.
Okay, and so I mean, it's very different than the farms that people have a habit to see, with the number of plants and the mixture of vegetables that you have there. So I can't consider like moving with a tractor through a farm like this. So how would you work on a farm like that?
It's very manual labour intensive. There's no way you can use any machinery there to go through any passageways. And everything's so close together for the reason that it helps itself grow.
Okay, and so one of the reasons for creating a farm like this? What would you say would be? Why not make a big farm with just a single crop?
Là, c'est l'idée de s'appuyer sur la biodiversité pour avoir une meilleure production et la complémentarité en fait de l'écosystème.
The idea of this one is to have more biodiverse, so you can have more crops in the same space and help the ecosystem work together by itself.
Okay. Well, this is actually something Massa has, I think, looked into. Massa, I think you've also looked into how you can put many crops together. And maybe Elizabeth can show a small image of one of Massa's experimental farms. So you've picked up on that idea, I believe, in what you call Synecology. So can you explain a little more about what that is?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, Synecology stands for synecological farming. So the word synecology is actually invented at the beginning of 20th century as a first conception in ecology. So synecology is a kind of discipline that studies the association of species in community. So this is an example. This picture is an example of Synecology farm in Japan, and this picture was taken in November. So usually wintertime we have a fallow period. So at the horizon you can see all the rice paddy field going fallow, but actually our field are filled with greens. And here we can see the association of almost 200 edible species together: vegetables, herbs, also traditional medicinal herbs, and the trees are fruit trees. And if you take the picture during the summertime, it's almost like jungle. So I just chose this picture of wintertime to better see the idea. And this is based on the concept of complex system science, or open complex system science, that Sony CSL Tokyo is trying to apply in many fields, including agroecology, but other disciplines like econophysics, healthcare, energy production, and so on. And I'm working on the agroecological application of this concept. And yeah, so this is the basic idea. And of course, there's a lot of knowledge that were already known in the field of synecology. Today, it is rather called community ecology. And we have a lot of symbiotic relationship. We have a lot of self-organizing structure of so-called niche structure. So this is how each species, plants and animals, find their place to live and survive on its own, and making up together the rich ecosystem. So this system doesn't require input like fertilizer or agrochemicals, but it's just the input of seed and seedlings and strategic association of these plants enable to sustain this huge complexity.
So, you also study Synecology as a scientist. So you try to measure the evolution of Synecology. And what would you say? What are the conclusions from that research? And what would we say, in a nutshell, are the main advantages of that approach compared to monoculture?
Well, the major difference is that it relies on the self-organization of ecosystems. So it's much like the initial life started in the sea and going upwards to the land, and they colonized the land surface. And we see the rich vegetation out of actually nothing based on photosynthesis. So Synecology is really good at re-establishing this kind of ecosystem was deteriorated, like the dry land area where inappropriate agriculture had massive environmental impact and went through the desertification process. From the experiment I conducted in sub-Saharan Africa, there's a really quick recovery of desertified land. So this is something that monoculture is difficult to achieve.
And then, so I would say both for say Linda's approach and Linda's farm and Masa's approach, clearly it can handle issues such as biodiversity and soil health. But what about maintaining such a farm? Linda, you mentioned it's a lot of manual work. Masa, I guess for the experimental farms that you are running, is it also mostly manual?
Oh yes, but actually small productions in Japan is all manual. Like 2,000 square meter surface. We have a lot of this kind of field of tract farming in Japan, and also in the world, a lot of smallholders are doing manual work. So it's just a matter of manual work on monoculture or polyculture, mixed polyculture in the case of Synecology. And of course, there should be some technologies and innovation that could be applied. Like we are trying to develop some small robotics to help people distinguish and harvest the complex field. And it's not going to be like the old paper machine that uniformly suppress the weed or uniformly sterilized the field. It's more like point by point effective, like acupuncture movement that try to enhance and rather stimulate the biodiversity out of the control.
Linda, do you see tools like this useful also in your farm? So can you imagine more robotic tools or other technologies that would help you maintaining more complex farming systems?
Je peux dire que moi, je ne ressens pas forcément le besoin immédiat, mais je peux comprendre que ça puisse aider, mais dans la mesure où, comme je t'ai dit, c'est renouvelable.
In Linda's case, at the moment, she doesn't have the need for anything like that because her farm is quite small, but she can see the utility for the future processes of this, as long as it respects the as long as it's sustainable and doesn't use any other natural resources to do this.
Okay, thank you. I'm adjusting myself to Chris now, because in the literature and the discussion there are this notion of appropriate technologies, which I think is an interesting term. It goes back to E.F. Schumacher, I think, who talked about it in his book The Small World. Small is beautiful, and so it's interesting. Well, first question is, what would you consider appropriate technologies in the context of farming?
I think that, as you said, there's appropriate technologies, there's convivial technologies, there's all kinds of terminology used to describe basically, these terms are used as antithetical to mainstream types of technologies applied to farming. And I guess they all have their little bullet points that describe what that technology actually entails. And I would say that the common denominator is that these types of technologies respect the local conditions and the local specificities and basically the desires of the farmers that actually work with the earth. So basically that type of technology is something that takes into account how farmers wish to work with the earth. And rather than pointing to these farmers how to do things, it just assists them into doing their work in a more efficient way or in a less back-breaking way, perhaps, rather than doing everything by hand, having some assistance into making their lives easier. So that's how I understand that type of technology. And I think that the discussion needs to be much more nuanced than what it is now. So currently, there's this duality where you have high-tech technology and, the massive automated machinery that raise the earth, and then you have farmers doing basically everything by hand. But the reality is not really that. So we probably need to expand the definition of technology. And by seeing what was discussed so far, even though I didn't see any fancy machinery in those beautiful farms, there is a lot of technology in there already. How you match those plants with the trees and how everything interacts into creating those jungle farms. There's a ton of technology in there. So most people understand technology as huge airplanes and quantum computers, which is not really the case. Technology is all kinds of things. So I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did actually. I'm going to pick up on that because indeed, when we think of technologies for farming, people indeed think a lot about robotics, and there's a lot of pictures in the media now about a robot standing in the field and so on. But there's probably like a lot of interesting things that we can do. We've managed about we talked about managing more complex ecosystems. And I think this is one of the challenge, I guess, where sustainable agriculture will have to go to. And so from a scientist or from an engineer point of view, we immediately think, can we use modeling techniques, or can we use tools for designing and modeling these ecosystems? And I would like to see whether Massa and Linda have the same point of view on that. Maybe Linda, what would you say? Would it be interesting to have like digital tools that help you designing a farm? And with designing, I mean designing the mixture of crops you're going to put, where you're going to put them in space, but also over time. Is this something that would be useful? How to collect data from what you observe, potentially share it with other farmers? What's your view on that?
C'est plus ça qui est intéressant, c'est de pouvoir prendre des données et les partager avec d'autres. Mais moi, je ne crois pas en fait qu'on puisse programmer quelque chose de vivant. C'est trop complexe, il y a trop de paramètres.
Linda says the things that she finds most useful will be the sharing of information between other farmers and people. We can't actually program something that's living, but you can help choose for the share of information, the share of knowledge, how things are done.
So Massa, would you agree with that you can't really model such a complex system as a Synecology farm?
Oh yeah, sure. I was actually working in other field like neuroscience and doing mathematical modeling. And when I studied this agroecological project, I'd say, oh my gosh, it's not possible to simulate it unless it's monoculture. So I totally agree with it. And instead, I rather call the exploration process or the interface instead of doing simulation or modeling. And I make the interface for possible exploration and also for the sharing of the discovery. So it's more like you don't know what's going to happen, but you have the list of species that you can introduce in the climate area. Then you will test and you get the score of which one worked or not, and according to which succession stage, because the ecosystem also evolves. So the first year, maybe we cannot grow corns, but the third year, yes, for example. So this is a very dynamical process. So it's always like a game of stock exchange, if you want. Mathematically speaking, it's much similar to the stock market. We cannot make all species survive in a very complex ecosystem, but we can have still substantial harvest out of the wide portfolio of the crops. So that's my strategy.
Okay. Chris, I'd like to come back to you because you talked briefly. Well, we talked briefly about appropriate technologies, and indeed, there's a tendency to either go maybe top down, where industry proposes new solutions. There's also the notion of indeed farmers making their own tools, and you have been able to study some of two groups of farmers who built their own tools. One is called Farm Hack, and the other is Atelier Paysan in France. So what were your conclusions from studying this more participative approach?
Yeah, plenty actually. So, but the main draw from studying these types of groups and the farmers that are very actively engaged in creating their own technology for the type of agriculture that they're doing is that, of course, as you said, it is a much more participatory process, and the tools that come out of this process are much more aligned to the needs of the farmers. So the basic difference of the output that comes from this type of activity, even though sometimes it really looks like something that comes from the market, is that the farmers were actually very much engaged in the process of designing and prototyping and then manufacturing those tools. So it really is there to address their own needs, and it usually addresses needs that the market does not, because there is no market incentive for it. You know, these farmers are usually small scale, whatever that means in a different cultural and national context, of course, but they're usually small scale or organic or regenerative. There's, much like technology, there's a ton of different terminologies on the different systems that farmers use for those family of sustainable agriculture. But then again, the common denominator here is the small scale, the respecting the earth, regenerating the soil, etc. So these initiatives and these groups of farmers and engineers and activists, they support those systems by developing those tools. And you know, these tools, they can be pretty sophisticated. It's again, that duality of high tech and low tech is not as clear as that, those two different sides. So these people design and develop tools that are quite complex, both in their application and how they function. So I believe that in the discussion around using robotics and automated technology, you get a lot of resistance from these types of people, because they say that technology actually removes the people from the earth and the soil. But then again, does it have to? Because they typically perceive that technology because it's introduced to them from an outsider, basically. And they say, rather than you doing weeding or fertilizing or seeding the soil, you can have this machinery do it for you. But I believe that you can develop even that type of technology having the input of the farmers themselves, so they can experience what this technology is meant to do, and they can somewhat understand how it functions. And then I believe that there can be collaboration. You can have, because I've spoken with farmers that are not very hostile towards the idea of using a small robot in their field, but they have a certain little star on how they would use it. And they would use it only for those activities that are very repetitive and very boring. So if it could help them to do that sort of task, then why not give it a go? If it's appropriate in scale, then why not? If it actually, if the energy and the resources it consumes to use are not massive, and you know, are part of the larger system, and you know, thinking about this in a structural way, then why not introduce that type of technology there too? But you know, by interacting with people in these initiatives, I understand their hostility towards that type of technology, because they are bombarded with it. You know, the discussion is nowhere near as it should have been. It's large scale, automated, you know, industrial farming that is advertised as the type of farming that we need in the world today, as the type of farming that would feed our large numbers. And you know, these people say no, that there's another way. So when they get to have the people developing those high-tech technologies come and tell them, why not use, you know, the appropriate scale of what we're doing over there? It's not as nuanced as it should have been, the discussion. And I understand that the hostility comes from that. So there needs to be a lot more of the involvement of the actual farmers in how these technologies are developed. And sadly, that is not really the case. Well, there are, of course, you know, exceptions to the rule, but that's what they are. They're exceptions to the rule, not the rule.
But you do think it's possible to find, say, some common ground where farmers can interact with engineers and researchers on certain technologies? I mean, for us, of course, this is interesting to hear, because it's one of the reasons we're at the Maker Faire, is exactly because we try to use everything that's available, but at the same time keeping it accessible. So you do think that there is an opportunity potentially to create like a sphere where the farmers and engineers and companies can interact and try to define what the appropriate uses of these technologies?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's possible. I think so because I have spoken with farmers that do use, they use drones to take pictures of their land to help them better understand the topology and design their agroecological practices around it. Or I've spoken with farmers that use sensors to measure humidity, etc., in their farms. So it is possible, but I think it needs to be done under the right circumstances and under the discussion needs to be bigger. Basically, is what I'm saying. I guess it needs to be done under the right circumstances and not speaking in terms of profit maximizing for certain of the partners involved in these partnerships that you're talking about. And I think that the farmers need to be convinced of that, because otherwise I think that the mistrust would continue. But having seen farmers utilizing more sophisticated technologies in terms of digital technologies and enhanced electronics, I think it is doable, yes, but of course under the right circumstances, and of course keeping in mind that the farmers are ultimately the people that should have the largest say in the design choices of these technologies. That's what I think.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll come back a little bit to the notion of knowledge sharing. When you walk into a small farm, often there's somewhere at the entrance or the workspace like a big blackboard with or whiteboard with all of the list of the tasks that need to be done, all of the things to take care of and not to forget, the organization of the farm with all the vegetables growing and what state they are, and also, if you read farming manuals, there's a lot of information there, and so organizing that for a farm, this whole knowledge is very complex. And I think, well, I'm looking at Massa. You've read a lot of farming manuals. You've written your own on Synecology. You've looked into different ways of how the species relate, how pests and plants relate. So how feasible do you think it is to organize all these different aspects of know-how on farming?
Yeah, that's a very essential question. So I'd say before knowing something as a knowledge, we need to experience it. So the know-how is better than knowledge. It may be implicit, but there are people who cannot explicitly say, but who can do it, and with very high performance. But the know-how also depends on the experience or the more particular parameters like the climate region. So there are very good people in natural farming in Japan who can do excellent farm in Japan, but not necessarily in India, for example. So at that stage, we need to further establish the principles in the scientific level. So ideally speaking, if it can be based on the scientific principles that could be tailored into each one's experience in each own climate region, and then come out with the concrete knowledge that could be shared. So it's the matter of lifetime education, and it's more like what we call literacy than knowledge. So how we can actually establish our literacy in a very communicative way, or in a very interactive and appropriate way with the environment. That's a crucial issue for sustainability education.
But even studying it scientifically is a huge challenge, no? Because the number of parameters you have, the variability. So, have you? I mean, do you have an idea on it? Would you give an example of like a scientific study that you did and what you could conclude from that?
Oh yeah. Well, actually, scientific papers are based on the very concrete evidence, but out of which we can synthesize a general principle. And usually, a general principle does not appear in the scientific publication because it cannot produce impact factor. It cannot increase my impact factor, so I cannot be famous as a scientist. But I'm writing a book, for example. I'm providing manual describing these principles, so out of the scientific evidence. But it's not the concrete knowledge. It's more like a qualitative knowledge that can guide people to interpret what's happening in a very complex field. So the basic principles is to go to the direction of symbiosis and the competition. And the competition is triggered by the dominance of single species in a fertile, rich environment, like fertilized environment. And the symbiosis rather happened in a low fertile environment, so without fertilizer, with many species initially competing, but going through the niche formation. That's something that we call over-yielding in English. It's more like 1 + 1 could be more than 2. There's a synergy of production, there's synergy of functionality, and there's synergy of interaction that sustain this symbiotic community. So if we take this kind of very simple yet very distinctive orientation on how to interpret the field, then we can say, oh, this field is going toward the competition, so we have to get back to the symbiotic stage. Or this symbiosis is pretty good, so we can keep on that. And this kind of management become possible. And then as a result, we have the concrete case of success and failure and so on. But it's coming at the downstream. So the crucial stage is really at the upstream of our perception of ecosystem, of the mechanism underlying the ecological process. And this is something that is not sufficient in scientific education, although it is available to extract from scientific knowledge.
Okay. Now, Linda, you've read also farming manuals, and you've managed the farm. Would you say that for this type of knowledge sharing, would it be like sufficient just to have like a Facebook group to exchange observations, or would you say it's possible to go beyond that?
J'imagine qu'on peut faire mieux que le groupe Facebook. Je trouve qu'il y a vraiment plein de choses à explorer là-dessus sur l'interactivité entre nous, quoi. Le lien, c'est le plus important.
She thinks it's very easy to do much better than a Facebook group and have something which is a more open communication, maybe to give them a more personal touch with more group meetings and things.
Okay, and technology-wise, do you see like, for example, to be able to look up information like in a specific context, you face a problem in the field, and you have tools to actually look up what to do in this case, or not necessarily an encyclopedia, but it could be a community-created knowledge system for handling difficult situations.
Il y a des chats qui existent, un peu des intelligences artificielles qui sont en train de se développer justement pour ça. Tu poses une question et ça te répond.
Do you think that would be a brilliant idea to have some sort of a program or some sort of artificial intelligence that can help you if you ask a question to give you an answer back?
Okay. In the beginning of the show, I also mentioned that in Paris around 1900, there were a lot of market farmers around Paris, basically producing most of the vegetables for the city. And this vision has, I would say the last 20 years has come back gradually. There's a notion of urban agriculture in its large context, urban agriculture not necessarily always in the city, but in the peri-urban area. Trying to install many small farms on the available land around the city to produce locally. It's a very attractive vision. Linda, how do you see, is this vision actually possible, do you think, in the current context? Is it desirable? How would you see, do you see this as a potential interesting evolution for more sustainable farming? Hello, Linda. Well, while we wait till, okay. We've lost the image, but we can still hear you.
Hello?
Yep, we can hear you.
Ok. Donc, l'histoire de la ceinture verte, c'est essentiel, mais il faut aussi qu'on ait une réflexion sur la taille des villes qui sont énormes et que maintenant il faut qu'il y ait aussi des gens qui aillent en ruralité.
She thinks the green band around towns is very important, but as well you have to start thinking of the size of the town and the size of the amount of people you have to feed. Maybe reduce the amount of people in the town to expand it out to give yourself more space to farm.
Et aussi qu'il n'y a plus les terres disponibles avec le prix d'achat des terres qui monte.
And with the land prices at the moment, there's no land available for farmers to start installing to do things because it's too expensive, basically.
Okay, I'm going to pick up on that later. I'm also going to ask the question to Massa, whether he also sees, like, the introduction of small farms close to the city as an interesting possibility for sustainable farming.
Yes, this goes to historical context also. Well, in Japan we have so-called the beds down structure. So people are going to work, taking the train filled with like 10,000 Japanese in one train, and those people are living in the suburb. And there's some distribution of small farms, but mostly the farms are located on the near mountainside, so we don't have frequent access. But there's a reallocation of the land in which we try to regain the green surface in the city, in the urban environment. And there we have lots of possibilities, like creating a small farm. We have also the movement of sharing economy based on this local food production. So there's a variety of small farming initiatives near Tokyo, for example, and there are some companies doing that. And the company that I recently founded also doing consultation on that. And the city side, the good point is that we have a variety of microclimates. So if you look at the skyscrapers in Tokyo on top, we have strong wind, but the climate is very different. The insect species that can visit the upfront is very different from the one living in downstairs. So here is a very interesting ecological network that we can create if we make the green patches around the cities. And we see lots of possibility, not only providing food, but also providing experience, like providing the workshop to augment the literacy of people to understand the ecological interaction and how the ecosystem functions could be beneficial to people's life, including our health, because natural ecosystem has the suppression capacity of pathogen. So viruses or other pathogens microorganisms cannot survive in a healthy ecosystem. Well, they can survive there, but they cannot propagate as much as like the COVID-19. So if we look at the global pandemics, it's on the basis the loss of biodiversity and loss of biological functions that has been nurtured in the natural environment. And there are lots of UN reports written on that. So not only the food production, but for the reconnecting our livelihood to nature will be also an important aspect. And yes, in Japan we have some sort of fancy movement happening, but we are still yet far behind the ecological movement in terms of European radical initiatives, for example. Yeah, so we have a lot to exchange.
I come back to something Linda said about farming land being expensive around the city. And this actually brings us to wider questions that are beyond, say, technology, which is sort of societal questions. It's, I mean, in the end, there's decisions that we have to take as a society, I suppose, on how we want agriculture to be, which is very hard to, how can I say, as an individual, have an impact on. But for example, one of the topics that comes back regularly when we talk about the robots is, on the one hand, we have people saying they need robots because they find it difficult to hire people to work in the field. On the other hand, as both you and Massa have mentioned, like working in the field is very labor intensive, so it would be good to have more people. But it's probably a bit too simple to just say we need more robots, because there's a bigger question. I don't know what your point of view would be on that, Linda.
C'est un projet de société. C'est vrai, on a besoin de plus de gens pour prendre la relève des agriculteurs. Là, il y a de moins en moins d'agriculteurs. On a besoin de gens.
It's definitely a social conversation or a problem here to deal with. There's a need for more and more people to take the place of the farmers afterwards, because no one wants to do this anymore. So you maybe have to ask the question of the together and how things work and how to get things associated and sorted out.
But do you know why no one wants to do it anymore? Because in the end, it's a beautiful job. It's working with nature, with a living system. It's about producing food. So there's so much to like about it. And how come it's so difficult to find people?
Il y a quand même une histoire de revenus. C'est pas bien payé.
It's nearly all comes down to wages. It's not very well paid.
Et puis il y a toute une population qui a une formation en agriculture chimique qui est pas valorisée, qui est pas bien vue.
And there's a whole generation of people who've got qualifications in a chemical sort of farming, which is no longer well seen or favoured about.
Donc il y a beaucoup de détresse. Les enfants ne veulent pas reprendre la ferme des parents qui donnent pas envie. Il y a un modèle spécial qui donne pas envie.
And now there's lots of distress with the descendants of farmers who don't want to take over the farm when they see something that is badly seen and fought after with all chemicals and pesticides being used.
Mais heureusement, il y a quand même une nouvelle génération de néo-paysans qui ne sont pas de la terre et qui s'investissent dans ces métiers avec une nouvelle vision.
But now you're getting a new generation of farmers, a new generation that are investing in the land and starting to do things more manually, that are taking over.
Mais il faut les aider parce que c'est pas facile.
But they need help because it's not easy.
Linda, you've also been member of, maybe still are, of Ferme d'Avenir, Future of Farms, and in which there's been a lot of thinking and a very interesting report that has come out of that, asking for more farmers for agroecological farming. How do you see this evolve in the current political and societal context? Is it, do you think these ideas are being picked up gradually, or is it very much like an uphill battle.
Est-ce que tu crois que le niveau politique il commence à accepter les idées de nouveaux paysans, ou je pense que c'est un truc ascendant qui est raison?
Mon point de vue, c'est que ça va vraiment pas assez vite par rapport aux enjeux de souveraineté alimentaire.
In her point of view, it is being seen, but nowhere quick enough to help us with the alimentation of the population.
Et que c'est finalement la société civile qui prend le relais. Société civile des people.
Là. And eventuellement.
Non, c'est la société civile.
And now it's the society that is slowly taking the place.
Mais que la politique est en dessous de ce qu'elle devrait faire aujourd'hui.
But the politicians are doing nowhere near enough to what they should be doing now.
And do you just this is a question on top of my head, but do you think that technology in that sense could speed things up, not only because technology could help, but could also introduce a sort of a new image that people associate with organic agriculture or small-scale farms, potentially attracting new people, young people?
Oui, je pense que ça peut participer à créer une nouvelle image de la néo-agriculture, mais qui pour l'instant dans nos têtes, la néo-agriculture, c'est plutôt manuel, c'est plutôt résilient, c'est dans cet esprit.
Yes, she does think technology can help give a new and a better image of the modern type of farming, neo-farming.
En même temps, c'est pas l'image que nous, on a véhiculée pour l'instant de la néo-paysannerie, la permaculture, c'est sans technologie.
But at the moment, the people see the new type of farming as something without technology, all manual. They don't see it how it really is and how it could be.
C'est ça.
And Massa and Chris, would you have like anything to add to that? Like, what would you be? Do you think new technology, a new point of view on agriculture, could that attract young people? Could that give like a new point of view on how to do agriculture, and then help to make this transition?
Should I go first?
Go ahead, Chris.
I think so, yes. But as Linda said, it's a very much a social issue. So we can't really say that having better marketing approaches on those agroecological practices would actively attract people. And thinking back to the discussion about urban farming, it's always a structural issue. We can't really say, I guess it's specific to certain national contexts. I'm guessing that in France it's much more nuanced and advanced, that sort of thing. In Greece it really isn't. So it's about seeing the issue of farming in a much more structural way, rather than asking a few hero farmers working in the fringes of the dominant system to say, go on, attract more people. Why are there so few of you working? So of course, better technology and more adapted technology to those practices would certainly help. But if the wages aren't enough to live on, I guess it wouldn't help much, would it? So of course, we need to have a much larger discussion about food in modern society. We need to rethink of several things, not just what types of robots we'll be using in the farm. So that's my comment here. And we definitely need new institutions to help farmers like Linda and other amazing farmers that are, developing methods that not only sustain the earth, but, regenerate it. So, all kinds of help from all types of government intervention, not just technological. That's my comment.
Yeah. You come from study of complex systems, and you've started to apply this to farming systems, which I think was very, very interesting to draw people draw scientists to this question, just to show how complex it is and how important it is. So, do you see, see like an opening for sort of new research line and new researchers to work on this topic?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, first of all, there's been a really huge progress on the community ecologies in the last half century. Like from 1960s, American ecologists really worked hard on the community level. So we now, to some extent, understand why biodiversity is important on the functionality and ecosystem services. And that's totally changing the perspective of what we call the optimization. Not only the optimization biomass, but of the function, and also the health consequence and environmental impact. All this should be included. And this cannot be achieved by the conventional, so-called traditional engineering method that we put resources in the black box and get the single or monoculture crop. And that's producing a massive environmental load. And instead of using the resources, we have to rely on the information to intelligently control the complex ecosystems. And that's kind of changing the concept of what we have been called technologies applied in agriculture. Until now, it's been more like the uniform suppression of weed or the strict control of monoculture field. And these performances were evaluated as the good point of agriculture technologies. But in the context of agroecology, how we can harness the big biodiversity and how we can make use of this diversity and avoiding the diversity riot, for example, will be the crucial issues. So there should be much focus on the information processing and how we can explore the huge potential of diverse environment and diverse community. And it will be changing the conception of technology itself. But most importantly, technological change is not the origin. And always the people's lifestyle change precedes the technological innovation. So imagine if you had the same amount of money, and if you can just use this money to promote agriculture technologies, between parentheses, and then the food tech venture would come and they will apply the plant factory, the cellular agriculture, cultured meat, and it doesn't necessarily change the lifestyle of people. But if you go to the community where people want to change their lifestyle and try to tackle the biodiversity and its huge potential, and out of their experience and their issues, if we try to conceptualize the new technologies and use money for that, that would be quite a bit of change.
Okay, thank you very much. We're coming to the end of this panel, and I would like to thank the panelists for joining us today for this very interesting discussion. We've only scratched the surface of such a big topic. I hope that we've been able to inspire some of the young people to look into technology, agriculture, sustainability. I hope to see you very soon in person. It's a sustainability session, so it's difficult to fly you in. Flying is a relic of the past. So, but I do hope to see you all soon. I would like to thank the audience, those here present and those following us online. And for those who are intrigued about what the sustainability is doing, the sustainability team in Sony CSL Paris is doing, I would stay tuned. Around noon, there will be an overview of some of our work. There will be like a live streaming from our stand, and some of my colleagues will present their scientific work later on. So I hope you will stay on. And I would say I hope you enjoyed it this morning, and keep up the good work. Thank you all. Bye.
Ouais.